The day my nephew finally managed to have me locked away in the mental asylum, I knew my revenge was a success. The de Clermont family once called me a stain that could never be washed out. That was my husband's family, a pack of wolves cloaked in aristocracy, with a mother-in-law whose heart was made of ice and children consumed by greed. And so, I spent the rest of my life weaving a perfect play, exclusively for them. A play in which my greatest performance was that of a senile old woman, out of her mind, a harmless puppet in the hands of my arrogant nephew, Jean-Paul. He had no idea that the puppet was secretly pulling the strings until the final act, the day my last will and testament would turn their fortune to ash. But taking their money was never the final goal. No, that would have been an ending far too merciful. What I wanted was to force them to their knees, not before me, but before the very arrogance that was their ruin, to beg for a chance at salvation from the hands of someone they had once despised. I learned to hide my hatred in the smallest of things, like tending to the rose bushes in the garden. The new gardener keeps asking me for my secret. The boy is naive. He looks at these pristine white roses on the table and thinks it is because of the soil, the water, or some expensive fertilizer from Holland. My old fingers drift across a petal, a touch that is almost a caress. I told him plainly, the best fertilizer is ash. He does not understand. Of course he does not. How could a simple soul like his possibly comprehend? The crackle of the firewood in the hearth. Such a pleasant sound. This fireplace has witnessed everything. Right here, Charles, Etienne's eldest brother, would stand with his arms crossed, boasting about some business deal, and his wife, Marie-Claire, would sit in that armchair and glance my way, her look suggesting I was a stain on her expensive Persian rug. They once filled this room with their laughter, with their arrogance, and now only ash remains. That is the secret, not just for roses, but for everything. You must burn the old garden to the ground before you can plant anything new. You must burn away the past, burn away those who dictated your fate. Everything beautiful must rise from something dead. My story is no different. It did not begin with a seed. It grew from the ashes. The flame did not erupt all at once. No, it began as a single spark, a stain, at the grand dining table of this very family. It was my first dinner party at the manor, a few months after the wedding. I was still a naive country girl, overwhelmed by the blinding light of the crystal chandeliers, by the weight of the silver cutlery in my hands. Around the table was a flock of vultures dressed in silk and satin, the de Clermonts. They spoke of things I did not understand and laughed at jokes I did not find amusing. God knows I tried. I tried to make conversation with Marie-Claire, my sister-in-law, about the flowers in the garden, but she merely smirked and turned to speak to someone else. I tried to smile at Charles, the eldest brother, but he just looked at me as if I were a misplaced piece of furniture, my every word drowned in the thick air of extravagance and pretense. And then, it happened. Perhaps it was the nerves, or the scrutinizing eyes fixed upon me. My hand trembled. Just a slight tremor, but it was enough to make the glass of rich red wine in my hand wobble. A deep red blotch spread across the pristine white heirloom linen of the family. The room fell silent, a silence heavier than any scream. All laughter, all whispers died out. Every eye fell upon me, and upon the stain. My mother-in-law, Eleanor de Clermont, did not get angry. People like her never need to scream. She calmly set down her fork, looked at the stain, then at me, her eyes as cold as if she were assessing the value of damaged goods. Then she turned to the servant standing in the corner and said, her voice was not loud, but it was clear enough for every single word to pierce the ears of everyone present. Take this rag away for me. Some stains can never be washed out. She did not even look at me as she spoke that last sentence. She did not have to. Etienne, my poor husband, stammered something in my defense. A phrase like, "Mother, it was just an accident." But his words were drowned out by the snickering laughter of his siblings, sharp as shards of broken glass. I sat there, not crying, not moving. I just felt the blood in my veins turn to ice. In that exact moment, I understood that I was not just an outsider. In their eyes, I was the stain. The spark had been lit. If that dinner party was the spark, then Etienne's death was the cold wind that fanned it into a flame. A few years later, Etienne passed away. He left quietly, just as he had lived, withering away in a family that had no room for artistic souls. At the funeral, the de Clermonts cried tears that cost them nothing. But the real cruelty only began once the manor doors closed. I was sitting in our room, now cold and empty, when they walked in. Charles and Marie Claire. They did not knock. They simply entered as if it were their room, and I were the intruder. "We are just helping you. Get organized," Marie Claire said, her sickly sweet voice making me nauseous. Organize meant throwing things away. Etienne's paintings, the unfinished works that held his very soul, were tossed into a corner like discarded rags. "These things just collect dust," Charles grumbled. Then they opened the wardrobe. They pulled out my few simple dresses, the books Etienne had given me, and threw everything into an old, battered suitcase. A worn leather suitcase that I knew belonged to one of the servants. It was not help. It was an insult. When they were finished, Marie Claire dusted off her hands as if she had just touched something filthy. She did not even look at me as she delivered her final sentence, their verdict. "We have called a car for you. You do not belong here after all." I did not say a word. I did not beg. I did not cry. Tears are for the weak, and the weak person inside of me had already died with Etienne. I simply rose, glided past them, left the room, descended the grand staircase for the last time, and walked out that door without a backward glance. They thought they were merely sending me away. They were wrong. They were trying to erase my very existence. A fatal mistake. Because one cannot erase fire, one can only extinguish it for a time, and when it rises again, it will consume everything. They thought they had gotten rid of me. They thought I would disappear, vanish into the Parisian fog, and return to the provincial hole I had crawled out of. The de Clermonts. They underestimated the power of a woman with nothing left to lose. I went nowhere. I rented a shabby attic apartment on the other side of the square. The paint was peeling. The staircase creaked, and the winters were bone-chilling. But it had something more precious than silk and satin, a window that looked directly into the heart of the enemy. Day after day, month after month, I became a spider, spinning her web in the shadows. An old pair of binoculars became my eyes, a notebook, my brain. What time did Charles leave the house? Where did Marie Claire go shopping, and with whom? When did the mail arrive? Who was the distant nephew's secret lover? I noted everything. Schedules, habits, the smallest cracks in their perfect facade. I studied them like a scientist observing a species of poisonous insect. And in that web of information, one particular fly caught my eye. His name was Pierre, a young lawyer in the de Clermont's long-standing law firm. Intelligent, sharp, but I could see the impatience in his eyes. The frustration of a racehorse trapped in its stall, always trailing behind the smug, older partners. Ambition is a weakness, but it was not enough. I needed something deeper, a string that could be pulled tight, and then I found it. Every Thursday evening he did not go home. He went to a small hospital on the outskirts of the city, where his aging mother was withering away from a costly illness. A talented lawyer, a devoted son, a man who was overlooked and desperate to prove himself. He was not just a pawn, he was the key, and I knew exactly which lock to put him in. Loyalty bought with money is cheap. The de Clermonts had taught me that. True loyalty must be built from something else, something deeper, like a debt, for instance. The little money Etienne had secretly left for me, I did not use it to survive. I used all of it, down to the last coin, for one purpose. I went to the hospital where Pierre's mother was being treated and paid off the entirety of her remaining medical bills, a substantial sum. I did not leave my name, only asking the staff to note it was from an old family friend. Then, I waited. I knew his routine. After every visit with his mother, he would sit alone at a small nearby cafe, drinking a cup of bitter black coffee. I arranged for a nurse to casually reveal the unexpected payment to him when he went to inquire about the bill. And just as I had predicted, a few days later, he found me in that very cafe. He rushed in, breathless, his eyes a mixture of gratitude and confusion. "Madame, I do not know what to say," he stammered. "Why would you do this? I will work to pay you back, I promise." I calmly set my teacup down and looked directly into his eyes, a gaze so serene it was chilling. "Pay me back?" I asked softly. "Are you offering to return something I have no need for, Pierre? I am an old woman. What good is money to me?" I saw the confusion on his face. That was when I tightened the string. "I did not give you money, Pierre. I simply could not stand by and watch a devoted son, a talent such as yourself, be buried by such a burden. You deserve a chance to soar. Do not let that weight hold you down." I paused, letting him absorb every word. "Do not consider this a gift," I said, my voice low and persuasive. "Consider it an investment in your future. Someday, when you are standing firmly on your own 2 feet, you can repay that investment to me in other ways." I did not say what those other ways were. I did not need to. I had turned an act of charity into a debt of gratitude that he could never repay with money. The debt of gratitude had been sown, and I knew it would grow stronger than any shackles. Pierre was now my loyal pawn. It was time to begin the chess game. My weapons were not daggers or poison. My weapons were ink, paper, and a forgotten talent of Etienne's. My husband, with his artistic soul, had a special gift for mimicking signatures, a pastime he considered harmless. I found his old letters, his unfinished contracts, in his studio. And so, my long nights began. Under the single sallow light of my apartment, I practiced, hour after hour. I studied every loop of the L in Eleanor's name, every powerful stroke in Charles's signature. Each stroke of the pen was not just ink. It was a drop of venom. Each perfect forgery was one step closer to the day of judgment. I became so obsessed that I could sign their names in my sleep. And then, we made our first move. The transfer of a small, insignificant plot of land. A test run. Pierre, though nervous, followed the plan. But he made a mistake. He gave it to a distant nephew for review, a detestably meticulous man. Pierre's call came in the middle of the night, his voice trembling with fear. "He is suspicious. He said the ink looks too new. He said he's going to have it examined more closely tomorrow." I could hear the panic in his voice, the fear of prison, of a ruined career. The spider's web I had so painstakingly woven was about to be torn apart by a single gust of wind. Fear was a luxury I could not afford. While Pierre panicked, my mind was already working, cold and precise. That night, a woman in a cleaner's uniform slipped into the office wing of the de Clermont Manor. I knew the place well, the dusty archives in the basement, a place no one ever visited at this hour. The smell of old paper and neglect enveloped me. I did not look for the contract. Destroying a single piece of paper would only raise more suspicion. I needed chaos. With a small piece of metal wire and my knowledge of the building's old electrical system, I created a short circuit right at the main fuse box for the archives. A spark, then a thin wisp of smoke began to rise, carrying the acrid smell of burning plastic. I did not run. I stood there, in the darkness, watching the smoke slowly thicken. The fire alarm would sound soon. There would be panic. Water from the sprinkler system would spray everywhere, and in that mess, a contract with slightly new ink would be meaningless. Amid the smoke that stung my eyes, I felt no fear. I only felt a chilling sense of peace. It was the first time I realized I was not just taking revenge. I was enjoying it. That fire had erased the past. Now it was time to bury their future alive, right before their eyes, while they were still smiling. I became an actor. My stage was all of Paris, and my role was that of an old woman slowly losing her mind. It was the performance of a lifetime, one that required patience and an absolute ruthlessness toward myself. It began with the smallest things. I would sit in the park for hours, muttering to the pigeons, calling them by Etienne's name. I would wear my sweater inside out, or wear one black shoe and one navy blue. The neighbors began to whisper, their words of pity a secret I savored. Then I began the performance for my main audience, the de Clermont family. On the rare occasions they invited me to dinner, likely to show off their own kindness, I would offer absurd investment advice. Jean-Paul, I would say to my eldest nephew, the greediest and most foolish of them all, I think you should put all your money into raising sheep in the desert. A brilliant idea, is it not? He would laugh, a condescending smile, and pat my hand. Yes, aunt, a brilliant idea. He looked at me as one would a child, a harmless possession. He thought he was easily fooling me, never knowing that he was the one taking the bait. Finally, the grand act arrived, the guardianship hearing. They had arranged everything, thinking they were performing an act of mercy. I sat there in the solemn courtroom, my eyes fixed on an empty space on the wall. The doctors, whom Pierre had carefully briefed with detailed notes on my erratic behavior, presented their findings one by one. They spoke of cognitive decline, a disconnect from reality, and being no longer competent to manage her own affairs. I did not protest. I just sat quietly, trembling deliberately from time to time. When the judge declared that Jean-Paul de Clermont would become my legal guardian and the guardian of my entire estate, I saw him turn and smile at his lawyers. A triumphant smile, like a fox that had just cornered a plump hen. He walked over, leaned down, and said to me in the voice one uses for a child, "Everything is all right now, aunt. I will take care of you from now on." He did not see it. As he turned away, when no one was looking, the emptiness in my eyes vanished. It was replaced by a glint of cold, sharp steel. He thought he had locked the old lioness in her cage. The fool. He did not know that he had just handed the key to the lioness herself. And then, the final curtain finally rose. I was wheeled into the library, a harmless old woman amidst a flock of vultures waiting to divide the spoils. They sat there in their fine clothes, the air not one of mourning, but of celebration. Jean-Paul, my dear guardian nephew, even kindly placed a woolen blanket over my legs. He thought he had already won. Pierre, his face as impassive as a priest's, stood up. A hush fell over the room. According to the last will and testament of Madame de Clermont, he began, his even voice echoing through the room. The assets shall be divided as follows. Item 1. The main de Clermont family manor in Paris. I saw Jean-Paul subtly puff out his chest. A smile almost forming on his lips. Has been mortgaged as collateral for a venture capital loan in biotechnology, under the approval of the guardian, Monsieur Jean-Paul de Clermont. The loan is currently in default. The smile on Jean-Paul's face froze. Whispers began to ripple through the room. Pierre continued, without pause. Item 2. The prestigious vineyards in Bordeaux have been used as collateral for a futures contract on agricultural commodities, signed by Monsieur Jean-Paul de Clermont. The contract resulted in a total loss. The confusion began to spread like an oil slick. Marie-Claire gaped at her husband. Charles stared intently at Jean-Paul. Item 3. The hotel chain. The shares have been sold to cover losses from other investments, under the direction of Monsieur Jean-Paul de Clermont. Item by item, Pierre read aloud. Every brick that had built the de Clermont empire had been turned into colossal figures of debt. The grand feast they had been expecting was nothing but an empty table and an unpayable bill. Finally, Jean-Paul could bear it no longer. He slammed his hands on the table and shot to his feet, his face flush with rage and fear. Lies! This old woman is insane. All of these documents were signed by someone who has lost her mind. They are worthless. This was the moment I had been waiting for. As the chaos reached its peak, Pierre calmly held up another legal document, silencing the room. "You are half right, monsieur," he said, his voice like ice, looking directly into Jean-Paul's eyes. The court did officially declare Madame de Clermont legally incompetent before these contracts were signed. He paused, letting the silence drive the point into their hearts. This means she holds no legal liability whatsoever. As the legal guardian who signed every document, Pierre emphasized each word, all personal responsibility for this entire debt falls upon you, Monsieur Jean-Paul. A scream erupted, not the sound of a man. It was the sound of a trapped animal, desperate and in pain. Jean-Paul collapsed into his chair, his face as white as a sheet. The entire family looked at him, not with pity, but with the eyes of wolves about to tear apart the pack member that had cost them their meal. The de Clermont family had not only lost their fortune, they now had a scapegoat to blame. And I, sitting in my wheelchair, slowly lifted the head I had pretended to keep bowed for so many years. My once vacant eyes were now clear and sharp as ice. And for the first time in decades, I smiled a smile of pure satisfaction. Bankruptcy was only the beginning. It was a quick death, far too merciful. I wanted something that would last longer, a torture they would have to inflict upon themselves every single day. And so, 1 week later, I arranged the final act. The setting was no longer the opulent manor, but a neutral law office, with beige walls and soulless furniture. The de Clermonts sat huddled in their chairs, looking haggard and gaunt. Their arrogance had been stripped away, leaving only raw desperation. Across from them sat a young woman in a simple nurse's uniform, her hair in a neat bun. She was the daughter of the former housemaid, and she looked utterly bewildered, with no idea why she was there. Pierre entered and placed a thin file on the table. "The will we read last week," he began, "pertained only to the family's tangible assets and debts. This will concerns Madame de Clermont's personal estate." A flicker of hope sparked in Charles's eyes. Perhaps there was something left after all. "Her entire personal estate," Pierre continued, "consisting of cash and diamonds, is valued at approximately several hundred million euros. The family was stunned into silence. Several hundred million, an unimaginable sum, and will be bequeathed in its entirety to a single heir. Pierre glanced over the breathless faces of the de Clermont, and then his gaze settled on the nurse. Mademoiselle Isabelle Dubois. If the silence before was deadly, the silence now was that of a tomb. Charles looked as though he had been struck by lightning. Marie-Claire brought a hand to her mouth, her eyes wide with disbelief. As for the nurse, Isabelle, she just shook her head, stammering, "No, there must be some mistake." Pierre let the shock sink in deeply, and then he delivered the final twist of the knife. "However," he said, and that single word rang out like a death knell, "there is one final clause." He looked directly at the de Clermonts. "The de Clermont family may reclaim the entire sum of money." Another insane flicker of hope. On one condition. Pierre emphasized every word. Slowly, cruelly. They must hold a public press conference, kneel before Mademoiselle Isabelle Dubois, and beg for forgiveness for their past wrongdoings against her mother and against Madame de Clermont. He closed the file. The sound was as final as a prison door slamming shut. "The final decision," Pierre concluded, "rests with her. I had not taken their money. I had turned that money into a weapon and placed it in the hands of the very person they had once despised the most. I had given them a choice between the arrogance that had ruined them and a mountain of money that could save them. My legacy was not one of wealth. My legacy was a perfect dose of poison. I did not give them the easy release of bankruptcy. No, I gave them a perpetual torture, an agony that would gnaw at their souls every single day. Every morning they wake up, they will have to face that choice. Dignity or money, the past or the future. They will have to look at each other and ask, what is the pride of the de Clermont name truly worth? Are they willing to kneel before the daughter of a servant to save themselves? I did not take their money. Who needs their filthy money? I took something far more precious. I took their souls. I turned the name de Clermont, the very thing they worshipped, into a legacy of shame. That is not revenge.